Yeah, no, I'm not gonna quit crushing on Jamel Bouie and his content anytime soon. So if I'm referencing one of his videos again for the second time this week, it is what it is. A couple of days ago, I went to this emergency, it's not a town hall, it was like a listening session in East Portland with my Congresswoman Maxine Dexter. And in that meeting, she brought up a really interesting point about working across the aisle with Republicans and what it looks like to be a Democratic legislator, and particularly in the House right now. Just now I was uploading a video about what Mark Ruffalo said at the Golden Globes, and as I'm waiting for it to upload, I'm scrolling my FYP, and one of Jamel's recent vids popped up in my feed, and I was like, oh, this connects very much with what Maxine said at the town hall, the listening session on Saturday. So I'm gonna just play a little bit. Jamel's video is 6 minutes long, so go watch the whole thing. If you're not on TikTok, because I repost to YouTube, Jamel also has a YouTube channel. And let me say really quickly before I show the little clip of his vid, I don't always agree with him, right? Sometimes he posts things, especially in Blue Sky, that I'm like, that's an interesting point. I'm not sure I entirely agree, but you really are giving me something to think about. I think it's important that we allow ourselves to be challenged by differing perspectives, particularly within the political left, right? We tend to silo ourselves really, really badly, right? To our own detriment. We need that big tent. So I have tons of respect for Jamel, even if I don't always agree with every single thing he has to say. I think that's very normal. It's very normal, very healthy. In this longer video that I'm going to clip here in a second, he was responding to Christian Divine, who was basically like, why is it that the Democrats don't function as an opposition party? It's so frustrating to see them not be obstructivist in ways that they can be, that Republicans classically have been. And I've made that same point that Christian makes. Feels like there's no fight from the Democrats. And Jamel kind of offered an alternate perspective here, or maybe provided additional context that I think is helpful.
Crafting bills, and there in the past has been a general desire to have bipartisan legislation, be able to say we are working together with the other side. This is a long-standing thing going well back into the early 20th century. In the 21st century, this has very much changed, really beginning in the late 20th century, beginning specifically with Newt Gingrich as Speaker of the House in the 90s. This has really begun to change. You've seen the American system move towards a place where minority parties act as oppositions more than they do as governing partners. This was basically Mitch McConnell's innovation to successfully keep Republicans in the minority from behaving like governing partners and impress on them that they'll get what they want faster if they behave solely as an opposition. So this distinction between opposition and governing partner can help explain some of the behavior of some Democratic lawmakers, that they're not accustomed to behaving as an opposition. I would say Chuck Schumer in particular is not accustomed to behaving as a pure opposition.
I think Jamel raises some good points here. And of course, I would say if Chuck Schumer is in charge of the Senate Democrats and he is still operating out of a mindset, out of a protocol, out of a culture in the Senate that has not existed since before Newt Gingrich, then why is he still in charge? And I think this is what we've heard from Indivisible as well, Ezra and Leah. Like, Chuck Schumer is a dinosaur operating as if we're still functioning in 1974 politics when it's 2026. Outdated. He's not evolved with the politics. And whether or not those politics of opposition versus trying to be collaborative are good and healthy for the country, I would not argue that what Newt Gingrich has driven in terms of the culture in the House and the Senate is going to be something that's healthy or good for the governing of the United States. And this is a conversation my eldest kid speaks German. She minored in German, and we talk an awful lot about German politics and culture. And one of the things that I find fascinating is that we only have two parties in this country, right? And maybe if we were more like the Bundestag and we had like 5, 6 viable parties, that we would have more collaboration. We would have to work across the aisle. We would have to form these coalitions where people compromise. It would result in less of this kind of purity politics, less of this binary thinking, less of this polarization of politics in the United States if we had to have 4, 5, 6 parties and 2 or 3 of them had to come together and compromise in order to gain a majority in order to govern. And in terms of Jamel's point that a lot of Democrats have this idea that they should still be participating in the process rather than being obstructivist, rather than being purely an opposition party. Like, Democrats have this different view that, again, we could argue whether it's antiquated, right? And we definitely can argue, like, why is it that you're operating out of a mindset that your colleagues, your friends across the aisle clearly are not using? And this is where my Congresswoman Maxine Dexter comes into play, because she talks about how she believes part of her role as a representative for Oregon's 3rd Congressional District is to have these conversations across the aisle, to not shut down dialogue, but to be open and always available to continue to try to remind Republicans of their humanity, right? That's one of the things I talked about in a video yesterday that gets people's hackles up, right? We can't dehumanize folks on the other side. We're never going to be able to get out of this if we're just constantly dehumanizing people on the other side of the aisle. But at the same time, I get frustrated with Maxine because she's trying to reach across the aisle and is like, I want to work with these folks. I said, how? There's a difference between recognizing their humanity and then being like, I can partner to govern with someone who's committed to fascism. But then, of course, she and even Republicans argue that they are strong-armed by Donald Trump into this position. A lot of them feel scared and threatened, and so they're voting for things that they know are wrong. There was an article the other day that talked about how if the Senate was allowed to vote behind closed doors, that they would vote overwhelmingly opposed to many of the things that Trump is doing. But he's got them over a barrel, whether he's got dirt on them, whether they're just afraid of being primaried with a MAGA opponent. I don't know. Whether they just love their wealth and power, whether they have a different worldview and ideologically they are aligned with MAGA. And at this meeting on Saturday, she said, her dad voted for Trump multiple times, but she still has conversations with him because she believes it is that one-on-one that can change hearts and minds. And there's a lot of evidence. There's a lot of evidence to that fact. And I respect her a lot for having the self-discipline, the self-control to be willing. It takes an awful lot of sacrifice to sit down and have conversations with people who support just god-awful, reprehensible policies, who are supporting Donald Trump. Like the amount of restraint, the skill that it takes, the ability to focus on their humanity and to set aside your righteous anger in order to try over and over and over again to build those bridges, to sow those seeds in the hope of changing minds and to getting people in Congress to turn away fracture from the coalition of MAGA. I think that's really important work that more Democrats than we realize in Congress are engaged in on a regular basis. I don't hear a lot of them talking openly about it, but Maxine does, and I know that she is not the only one. And the big example that she mentioned that really got me thinking was, here in Oregon, we have an awful lot of Democratic women who are representatives in Congress over in this part of the state. But if you go out east and south, it's a Republican, Cliff Bentz. And I was just about to say he is a piece of work. He's a piece of work. But Maxine is willing to have conversations with him. And she, her district abuts his. And so she said, we have shared resources, shared populations where some folks live in my district and they work in your district, right? And so we should be collaborating. We should be caring about our shared constituency. And she said that he is afraid to have a bipartisan meeting with her, a town hall, whatever, because he's afraid that that he will get ambushed, basically. The Democrats will ambush him. There can be no kind of honest conversation. And so she's having those closed door conversations, but she really got me thinking, what would it look like if we had Republicans who have supported Donald Trump, who are willing to sit and listen in bipartisan meetings with Democratic members of Congress and a diverse constituent base? What would that look like? And would that be a good use of our energy? Is that something that could be productive? Is it, a desire for us to have this quick fix in the midterms? Is that realistic versus is the real work slow, far more tedious, and we don't see the benefits of it very quickly? And it is that relational work. It is that wanting to reach Republican members of Congress slowly. And I think Maxine is engaged in good and worthy work. And that is very different than being an opposition party. She opposes fascism, but she's willing to build those relationships and do that labor on behalf of her constituents with members of the Republican Party, outright fascists. What do you think about that? What do you think about Maxine having conversations with Cliff Benson, how different that looks to the kind of polarizing politics on the left. How different that is to like wanting to block all MAGA and refusing to talk with them. I don't know. What do you think? What do you think about that?